So I don't know which whomever wants to start. Yeah, Jersey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm happy to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name's Rosiel. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a lived experience researcher, a PhD student, and a Master of Psychology graduate. My PhD research is in the field of neuroscience and mental health. And I'm exploring, my PhD explores mechanisms of trauma and capacity in the neurobiology of anorexia nervosa. I also work as a lived experience researcher, advisory committee member, and mental health consultant on a number of projects and committees in areas of eating disorder, suicide, particularly in youth, and gender and sexually diverse populations, psychosis in extreme states, neurodivergence, trauma and iatrogenic harm, and elimination of restraints and seclusion in psychiatric settings. And I have a particular love of mad poetry and mushrooms and fungi and cephalopods. I had two poetic pieces published in the first issue, and today I'll be reading from a scholarly poem piece, which will be published in an upcoming issue.
Well, thank you so much, Rosiel. Um, yeah, as someone also who has the privilege to get to read your work, it just deeply impacts me. So it's also so lovely to kind of just share the space with you. And thank you as well, Adam, for all of these wonderful introductions. Yeah, so I'm Jersey Cosantino. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a former K-12 educator, and I'm also a doctoral candidate in cultural foundations of education at Syracuse University. And I have certificates of advanced study in women's and gender studies and disability studies. Um, and my work really operates at the intersections of MAD studies, trans studies, and oral history. And I am white. For like a visual description, I have white skin. I'm wearing glasses. I have a newly shaved head, short brown facial hair. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and I have a blurred background. I also identify as mad, neurodivergent, autistic, queer, trans, and non-binary. And I also am a white settler here on unceded Onondaga land, also known as Syracuse, New York. And the last pieces I'll also share is that I'm one of the co-editors of the International Mad Studies Journal, and I also come from a peer support background, particularly as a former Trans Lifeline call operator and also a street medic here in Syracuse, New York.
Thank you so much, well, both of you for being here. I mean, I've read both of your work and I'm just such a big fan. So I'm really excited about the conversation today. And so I think if this still makes sense for folks, we'll probably start by each sharing snippets from pieces of our work, a little bit of a reading, and then going into some dialogue and conversation. So I can start with some of my work. And for me, I should probably have in my introduction given more background, perhaps. But I also use they, them pronouns, and my entry into MAD studies really came through lived experience as well. I'm an educator by training and in background. So I have my doctoral degree in curriculum studies with a joint collaborative in women and gender studies in sexual diversity studies. And so it wasn't for me until I think probably my doctoral studies that I really started to have space to challenge the dominant ways of being and thinking in the academy, and also have other potentialities perhaps presented to me that weren't available otherwise. I certainly didn't have anyone talk to me about critical disability studies or MAD studies in my teacher education program. And so for me as someone who's MAD, non-binary, neurodivergent, poetry and writing has been a real way of essentially taking up space in the academy and writing space for myself and creating space when space isn't there. So a lot of my writing really deals with issues of epistemic injustice and erasure. And as someone who teaches in the pre-service, in particular, I teach or have taught in a pre-service early childhood education side of things. I've really felt the gaze of like developmentalism and child development and psychology being really reinforced as the dominant status quo. And so as someone who belongs to communities that are continually pathologized by the sciences and psychology, poetry, and writing about my experiences as a mad person who teaches future teachers has been one way of me kind of writing myself into existence in an academy that doesn't always provide space for that. So I'll just share a piece that I recently had published. And one thing I've been playing with in my poetic writing, along with this idea around epistemic justice and writing from my mad standpoint, is this idea of crossing myself out. And so what does it mean to be an early childhood educator who is forced to essentially cross out my subjectivity, deontologize myself as I work with future educators. And not only that, but be provided with materials that I'm expected to teach that are often quite violent towards my subjectivity. And so navigating this sense of consciousness where I'm having to almost erase myself in my teaching and engagements with students, or that's, you know, been my experience. I started really using poetry as a way to challenge kind of the epistemic injustice within that, and in particular, the surveillance of the psi disciplines and the psi sciences. So I'll just, yeah, I'll share my screen as well, because a lot of what I do is really also aesthetic. And so a big part of my poetry is really also playing with mad aesthetics and questions around allowing space or places for me to take up space that I haven't always felt that I've been able to in the past. So I entitled this Moving Forward with and Through Early Childhood Educators Madness. And again, I crossed out the early childhood educator, going along with this kind of wordplay that I'm doing. So I'll just, yeah, perform it. So I choose here to defy the conventions of what or who you might expect to be writing this article. Do you expect me? What does it mean for someone to be unexpected? Maybe to be expected is to be adjusted. Am I adjusted? Have I adjusted? My stories are our stories, stories of early childhood education. What stories of early childhood education do we listen to? Maybe we all have different ideas of what an early childhood educator is, or can be, or who an early childhood educator can be and become. Mad educator, bad mad educator, mad bad educator, an early childhood educator, an early childhood educator, an early childhood educator. When I'm feeling that I cannot bring my whole self forward, I am silencing my queerness, madness, neurodivergence, to be the educator I am expected to be. I cannot be the person who silences my madness, hides my madness. I refuse to live in fragments. I didn't know that being an early childhood educator meant changing myself. An early childhood educator, an early childhood educator, an early childhood educator. My voice, early childhood educator's voice. You might think this poem disturbing. disturb you? Does madness disturb you? How can someone fit when the world doesn't try and fit them? And the educator, the early childhood educator, the mad early childhood educator. So I'll end it there. It's kind of like, I'm not used to performing, so that's a little rattling for me, but thank you. It's one thing to write stuff, another thing to speak it. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it there for now, and I'll pass it over to whichever one of the presenters would like to go from there to continue the conversation, and then yeah, and then we'll have a discussion. Yeah, I can definitely share the link.
Rosiel, would you be comfortable going next, or would you want me to go next? What feels good for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. I'll just see if I can share the screen. Is that working? Can everyone see the piece? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So a little bit of background to this piece. I had experiences in the mental health system as a child, and then an adolescent into my adulthood. So early on, my experiences and understanding of psychosis very much within the biomedical model. And I found it very violent and traumatic. I was often experiencing restraint and seclusion. I was put under a lot of medication. And I understood my experiences of psychosis as very linked to trauma, but I wasn't able to heal from those experiences because I was being told these narratives of disorder and that I had impairments that were, my own individual impairments. So there was a lot of re-traumatization and iatrogenic trauma that I experienced. And part of this was the lack of understanding of catatonia within my experiences of psychosis or extreme states. And I think catatonia is very misunderstood. My experience of catatonia is it was very adaptive. It was very much creating a sense of safety within myself, which was also very much linked to the experience of the world as being unsafe, experiencing trauma, and trying to create a sense of safety within myself when there was no safety in the outside world, particularly in these systems of care that were so violent. When I began my studies in psychology and neuroscience, I looked more into research in catatonia and found there were significant gaps. The understanding of catatonia is very limited. It's very much grounded in the biomedical model. There's a lack of qualitative research about people who've experienced catatonia, and there are no first-person accounts of catatonia in the psychiatric literature. So this this piece was a combination of research and poetry because I wanted to include a first-person account of catatonia in the literature somewhere, that rather than it just being research, I wanted to combine poetry so that it brings people into the sensory experience of catatonia to try and deepen that understanding, to try and hopefully break down some stigma and broaden conceptualizations of what catatonia is, can be, and how it might be adaptive and protective for a person. So I'll just read the abstract and then I'll read a portion of the poem. So beginning with the abstract, this poetic mediation explores catatonia from a personal perspective and sensory geography, including its interrelationships with trauma survival, threat responses, and the use of catatonia to create a safe harbor within the self. This creation of a world within the self allows a shutting down and shutting out of broader realities to find healing space when no safety can be found, and a recuperation in self-sanctuary. The catatonic cocoon is untethered from time and the expectations of movement, sound, speech, and performance. By repositioning catatonic experiences as having emotional and physical functions outside of biomedical conceptualizations of neuropsychiatric disorder, these experiences can be explored as both incidents of vulnerability and as powerful survival strategies, at times subconscious and at times agentic. Approaching this concept with curiosity provides the opportunity to consider how to connect with a person experiencing catatonia and insights into its timeline, meanings, and purpose. Catatonic cocoon. My breath is torn, ragged, claws its way to my lungs as though there will never be enough room to suck enough air down. My eyes grow to discs and collapse to pinpricks, disappearing into black holes, a spell whispered over a grave. I am dying alone with a vast audience, unmoving in these last moments, witness to pain, bestowing no rights, flower wreaths unleft at the empty foot of my tomb. If they could peer through a window to my heart, they would see a flock of hummingbirds. Robbed of my words, they see me as a scarecrow inside a Tin Man's shell, broken mind, cardiac arrest, cataleptic cocoon. Strangled scream muted by heavy drugs and heavier disdain, and gloomy stupor blanketing the atmosphere, a moody shroud of doubt. The taste of mad fear lingers here and hereafter. Its song begins its echo into my bones, la la la. I do not fall in the physical world, I fall inward, unraveling in parallel, vanishing into the farthest corner of myself, imagining severing cords that connect mind to body to world. Meteors orbit, collide. Neutron stars collapse into the weight of themselves. I am screaming internal, pull the plugs, kill the nerves, turn it off, until all goes dark. Body is still, slips into rigor mortis. Deep in the cavern of this skeleton, all is numb, all is hushed. I can see the world above from a distance that folds back on itself. I pull my blood into a corner, shield my heart in the warm shelter of my arms, lace the dark and quiet around its damp thudding until it slows. I sing my heart a lullaby in the quiet dark and rock. There is no echo here. I exist within myself and time and space immortal, immaterial, eternal. Time ekes on. Body's shadow must have cast an inky blot into the thin carpet. Time begins to disappear. Nothing matters here. The pounding thud of the heart above, a distant sound of thunder raining down to pitter-patter. Thoughts are not my own. They reverberate out. Broadcast from a distant satellite. SOS to nowhere. Messages to center control. I can see my tiny soul. A green seed curled and soft. Way, way down in the dark bellied chamber of this giant body self, so huge in the unsafe world, it cradles me in its husk. I'll just stop there. Thank you, everyone. And I'll pass over to Jazzy.
That was so gorgeous. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Oh, I just like need a moment. That was just so, it was so beautiful to hear you read this piece aloud, Rosiel. Because, you know, I had the privilege of reading it back when you first submitted it months ago to the journal. And something like, because you framed what brought you to the piece, something that I haven't got to share with you is that I actually experienced like another experience of being like stuck or frozen in public, and it happened on my on the hallway of my department, and it happens for like about an hour. It happened again this summer, um, but these are the first times it's been happening when I'm out in public, and I just get frozen. I can't move, as if I like just turned to stone. Um, and I tried to find, you know, experiences of it online, but I just didn't know what word to use. Like I just couldn't figure it out because I call it stuck, frozen, and I just couldn't find something about it. And then your piece appeared in the journal, and I was just like, oh my gosh, Wow. Oh my gosh, this is it. And the way you frame it too, was so powerful for me because of course I felt really embarrassed. I felt a lot of different things from it. And anyway, I just wanted to say that already the piece isn't even published yet, but you're already impacting so many lives and doing the exact thing that you're desiring to do. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. That means very
Yeah,
much.
yeah. So the piece that I'm going to share, and I'll place the link to it here in the chat, is from the very first issue. And I have some more poetic pieces that are out there as well, that are all different forms. But for now, I'll definitely like to share uh, my piece, particularly from IMSJ. So I'm just going to scooch this. Okay, perfect. And I'll make this full screen. All right. So I'm not going to read all of this. Can you all see this okay? Is it visible on your screen? Okay, great. So I won't read all of this. I'll just read for, yeah, maybe 3/4 or so. All right. Now, don't say we didn't warn you. A mad poetic or a poetic meditation on the impossibilities of mad trans time. Recently, I saw a post on social media from the University of Victoria's renowned transgender archives that included a clip from the September 1997 issue, #1 of FTM newsletter, published by FTM International, the longest continuously running organization for the trans masculine community, a publication that ran from 1987, the year I was born, to 2008, my junior year of college, when I learned that genderqueer was synonymous with me. This excerpt from the very first edition of this groundbreaking newsletter that became a lifeline by connecting trans masculine people worldwide was posted without context, merely containing the caption warning caution. We do not recommend this sarcastic advice from FTM Newsletter 1987. Above this caveat, written in black typewriter font, with a regularly elongated spacing between words etched against a pale pink background, read the following. Now, don't say we didn't warn you, but maybe you can save thousands of dollars on hormone injections and surgery by standing on the roof with a coat hanger during the next thunderstorm. These words, taken directly from the newly digitized FTM newsletter archive, hauntingly on display in the liminal space between past, present, and future, re-archived here in the virtual realm of social media that already teeters precariously on the edges of the real and the unreal, an archive demanding these trans masculine experiences be deemed legitimate enough to warrant their recording, transforming moments of the here and now, the then and there, into an archival time that plays on repeat indefinitely. For how does one mark an ending when so many of us have been denied a beginning? We're cut off from the remainder of the newsletter, which is needed to substantiate this fragmented proposition, a disconnection from a journalistic context that, only when presented in its entirety, makes it, them, us, me whole. A literary and narrative lifeline that for over 2 decades crafted words of embodiment, lands of desires, elsewheres of transmasculine imagination, paving the way for me to be. When we create space for ourselves and others to dream, we embody reoccurring hope, active love, critical resistance, and radical change. We were reminded that those who came before us dreamed of that which no one could thought could exist, that their dreams are the reasons that we are now living the impossible. As a masculine presenting trans person with a non-binary, genderless or more gender identity, who also identifies proudly as mad, I could not help but read the words in this post through both a trans and mad lens, picturing the scenario of standing on a rooftop, longing to be electrocuted as a means to save money and time on gender-affirming hormones and surgery made perfect sense to my mad trans mind that equally and contrastingly seeks to challenge normative expectations for rationally defined sense making. Not only do my experiences with bipolar and OCD lead to intrusive thoughts and chronic suicidal ideation that, especially when in the midst of the complexities of a mixed state, involve repeated visualizations and deeply embodied yearnings to soar off my roof in the ether and or plummet to the ground below. These are the things I love about crazy, the way you can lick the inside of your skull, the manic flight, and the deep grief sacred low when you feel the heartbreak of this world. but also as a trans person who continues to navigate the gatekeeping of the highly anti-trans, ableist, sanist, racist, colonial, white supremacist medical industrial complex, wherein I have to feign sanity in order to receive gender-affirming care, care that is always, though, mediated through the unearned privileges that my whiteness affords. I interpreted the words of this post to be a reflection of what occurs when we allow mad and trans worlds to collide. As Zenesh Rahman illustrates in The Care We Dream Of, liberatory and transformative approaches to LGBTQ plus health, as queer and trans people living at the intersections of many identities, we remember all the times we've been called by the wrong name or pronoun by a care provider. We're met with suspicion or disbelief when we tried explaining where we are hurting and why. We're given inadequate pain relief because someone wrongly believes Indigenous, Black, or brown bodies deserve less pain relief or feel less pain than white bodies do. We remember feeling like we can't talk openly about drug use, sex work, or suicidal ideation because we're criminalized or incarcerated in a psych ward or a jail. We feel like we can't show our whole selves to the people whose job it is to care for us. When we do access healthcare, we strategize about which parts of ourselves to conceal or reveal to be considered credible and worthy of care. I'm dreaming of a world where these kinds of compromises are unnecessary. To name my mad and trans embodiment as co-occurring phenomena that shape the ways I inhabit the world and construct and reconstruct meaning in the spaces and places that affirm the complexities of my wholeness and or violently deny me access to the wisdom that I derive from a self that embraces all of my fractures, fissures, and fragmentations, remains a terrifying point of self-dislocation for as long as gender dysphoria remains housed within the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM. My madness will always be weaponized as a tool to discredit my transness. My transness will always be deemed deficit and need of cure and treatment, a mechanized pathology that relies on the construction of deviance as an appendage of mental, quote, illness. I live daily with the consequences of medicine's definition of my identity as an emotional disorder. Through the filter of this official pathologization, the sounds that come out of my mind can be summarily dismissed as the confused ranting of a diseased mind. It is within this tension that I return to the excerpt from FTM newsletter that calls me to renegotiate and reconceptualize what trans time can be when the institutions designed to offer us care are the very same ones that deny our wholeness, forcing us to prove our transness using timelines that were never designed for us, training us in the art of concealment and elision as tools not of liberation, but rather survival. What does trans time mean, encompass, comprise when it is not forced into constraining colonial chronologies, when the desire and longing to reimagine one's past, retell one's story as the being that one truly was, as opposed to the corporeal form that one was judged and assumed to be, becomes a deluge within, impossible to contain, demanding histories to be rewritten, time that was lost to transform serendipitously into time that was found. What does the magic, beauty, creativity, and power of trans time, of trans imaginaries look like, feel like, smell like, taste like, that is just so sexy when enshrouded by the impossibilities of mad time, mad dreams, mad worlds, and mad subjectivities? You're going to find people you can sketch the inside of the world with. If you can't find them, you can sketch the secret inside of your world, inside yourself. Breathe in the place where all the words fall away into lemon yellow rose fractals, and it's fucking amazing. I'll pause there.
I remember when I first read this and it just felt completely electrifying and validating to me. And hearing you read it again just like adds another like just different layer to it. It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful piece, Jersey, and I love the way in which you illustrate for the audience this mad trans temporality and how you bring it forward with such like affective momentum behind it as well too. It's really stunning. So I think what we might do is move towards just an open-ended discussion. And essentially in this discussion, just having a conversation between the three of us, and then eventually opening it up for the audience as well too. As folks who were at the Mad Studies meeting earlier might know, my cats will probably be walking in and out of this discussion as well too, because anytime I'm on Zoom, they flock to me. And then when I'm not on Zoom, go and do their own thing. So my first question, I think what I am left thinking about, and it's a tie, I think, between your pieces and mine too, but this idea of almost poetry being a way to create some sort of new imaginary as well too. Uh, and new, not in the sense of brand new, because I think there's both a resignification of experiences that we've had or that we've encountered, and then also some sort of future orientation. And I'm wondering if that resonates for both of you. And if not, that's okay. And I'd love to hear maybe how for you, your poetry means something different. Yeah, sorry, Rosiel, did you unmute yourself?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Like it a lot of um writing poetry to me is has the intention of like trying to elicit some sort of change, whether that's change within the self, like whether that's trying to transform and make sense of experiences and process them, or like bring other people into those experiences so that it's connecting to others in some way. Whether it's to make yourself feel less alone in that experience, other people less alone in that experience, bringing other people into understanding that experience. So much of it is about connection, and that's got that future focus. So it's like about transforming those past experiences. And so much of it to me is also just that connection piece and like needing to feel heard, which I think is like a beautiful part of poetry. And it's such a great part of that, like a different form of communication is like you're leaning into language in a different way, and you're really trying to explore language in such an emotional and sensory way. And I really love that about it, because you're trying to find words to name and explore experiences that you don't normally express to people when you're just, talking to people about how you're feeling. And you're trying to find a way to name and describe those experiences with and for yourself and other people, um, to kind of experience that in a different way as well. Um, and I think that's how powerful it is. And especially when you're thinking about it in like that's so much of it in mad poetry as well, because you're reshaping language or you're turning language on its head. And that's what
Yeah, I love
yeah.
that. I love that, turning language on its head. I know for me, and actually, Jersey, I'm going to give you so much credit right now. You were like such an entry point for me as well. I read your work and it like created a world for me. So I just want to give you so much for everything you are and what you do. And so when I read your work, and I'd always written poetry privately, but never felt comfortable sharing it. And as I mentioned, for me, my journey academically was one that, because of the way in which teacher education works, it's very often like positivist. I had to go through a lot of schooling that was almost trying to shave off, I think, parts of who I was. And so it wasn't until I found Mad Studies and then I found your work and it opened a world. And then other mad poets as well. And I think there's something really interesting in the way in which language and the resignification of language in mad poetry, to speak to what you said, Rosiel, is really powerful. And there's something really like about honoring personhood in a world that tries to, again, I think about this like notion of deontologizing, or tries to make us like not exist or not be, essentially not be, right? And that's what led me to kind of playing aesthetically, like with crossing myself out in the poetry I write and stuff, and all these things. And Yeah, I think there's something really interesting around the temporality element. Like we're essentially in relationship with each other, creating some sort of future, while revisiting our past and re-signifying it, perhaps. I don't know if that resonates for you, Jersey, as well.
Yeah, just I thought everything that you both shared was really beautiful. Yeah, I'll only oh, and thank you so much, Adam. Yeah, I'll just add a tiny bit on. Is that there's something too as well around like the newness of something. Um, and something I often struggle with is that it feels like it's so powerful to attempt to find words to describe experiences that can feel so complex and muddied. And also at the same time, um, it feels like it's almost this new and sometimes incomplete entity that I'm never quite certain if there are even words to put to the full experience. And sometimes I feel like there's some longing there, or yeah. And I think in terms of mad poetics, I'm also really sitting with and wondering around what will come for me next in terms of the mad poetics, and particularly the mad trans poetics, that aren't bounded by words, that may not exist on the page. And then what does that poetics look like? And so really seeking to the folks who are also creating those worlds for us to explore. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting around, um, like what does poetics look like, or how is it actualized? And again, like for me in my work, that's where the aesthetic pieces. And it was interesting as I was reading, because like I said, I'm still getting used to like publicly reading, I guess, and playing. I don't know if you folks feel this way, but the affect, as someone who I guess like hasn't felt comfortable being my full self for a long time, even expressing fully what's on the page sometimes has a really interesting kind of affective embodied thing going on for me with that. I don't know if that's something you both experience as you read, or if it's something that maybe, isn't a thing for you.
Yeah, I think for myself, reading a piece out loud has a different level of going back and experiencing the meaning behind those words and their weight, um, particularly because you're feeling and saying those words, um, and you're finding like a different rhythm to how you would speak them in your mind, perhaps, or you're thinking about the translation of that to your audience, but it also pulls it back into your body. So it sort of brings you back into an experience in a different way. And sort of links more in that the embodied aspect of that emotion. Which I really enjoy. And it sort of, you can feel it wake your body up in a way. You can feel all of that, like, um, yeah, your body feeling really awake and alive um, when you do it. So it does, you do feel it in a very full way in your body after you read, which is really interesting. And it does bring a different aspect to reading the work and experiencing the work.
Yeah, that's so gorgeous. Thanks for sharing that. That was beautifully put, that like re-encounter. Um, Jersey, maybe if you feel called to, and if not, that's okay. I was going to say if you have anything else to share in relationship with the reading, and then we can definitely open it um, up to the audience as well too, if folks have any questions for us about our work, or just in general.
Oh yeah, I think the only piece I'll add is I'm also sitting with as well what the experience has been like to also hear, like for example, like being present to hearing you both read your pieces aloud, and just I don't know, just some pieces that I feel like are very connected to that embodied reflection of various elements that come alive or are made possible within all these different levels and iterations of performance and sharing a piece. Um, and just also to what we as a journal may begin to offer. in those ways of how folks can also then come to experience a piece. And not only in terms of multiple access points, because also having something read aloud is also critical for access, but also to what are these other ways for folks to experience a poetic piece that could be multimodal, that we as a journal could start to explore. So I'm just trying to get also really excited about that.
I love those reflections. Thanks, Jersey. Yeah, that's great. I think what we might do now is just open it up for questions. So if folks in the audience here would like to ask anything generally or specific, yeah. And you can definitely use the chat as well.
I had one question. This was, I think, for everybody, for all the poets. So when do you get your inspiration? Is it during when you're going through those emotions, or in my case, I have bipolar, so sometimes you go through an episode, or is it really after when you've kind of, I don't know if
Yeah, no, that's a great
am I getting
question. Yeah, you're definitely yeah, that's a wonderful question. Thanks so much. I don't know if either of you want to start with that.
Yeah, I think I've done both. Like this particular piece that I read part of was reflecting on experiences from like a long time ago that um, I just have different have come to like a long a long kind of journey of a different way of perceiving them and understanding them, particularly once I started to process a lot of iatrogenic trauma from the mental health system, and a way of understanding the meaning of those experiences. But I've definitely also written pieces as a way of like processing and uh, finding a way of healing through experiences. And sometimes, I'd come back and revisit those pieces again, or sometimes I'd just leave them as they were and just like that was part of the process. So yeah, all different ways of doing that. Sometimes I do things like found poetry as well, of like finding words in different forms. Whether that was like in texts and like gathering things together and like grabbing words and like performing them through like that kind of way. Particularly if it was a particular medium that I wanted to explore, like a text or something that I'd found harmful, and then I wanted to reconstruct it into something that I found healing, to process that into something that could be helpful and healing for me or potentially others. So I find, that could be part of processing an experience. Yeah, so different ways of being in an experience or coming back to an experience later, and thinking about it.
And I'll just briefly add on. I so appreciate this question. As someone who also experiences bipolar, I think, and have created quite a few poetic pieces. And this for certain, the piece that I shared, I was mostly hypomanic when I wrote it, for certain. And it's interesting because over the years, I feel as if I would have a really deficit mindset around what I was able to create or produce if I wasn't hypomanic. And I think more recently I found that a bit saddening because I know that that is also how I've been socialized. How these larger systems, right? So if I'm feeling depressed or if I'm in a mixed state where I'm just too much, I can't create something like this. But actually, one of my mentors, particularly at the intersections of transness and madness, just reframed it so beautifully for me. And the notion of like poesis in general, as being that which is, so much just part of our own embodied experience of moving through the world within maddening systems. And I feel like it just opened for me this notion that it doesn't have to be what I produce or how I produce it as some type of a metric, and a normative metric that dictates if it's poetic or not, but rather and often too, even just the experience of mixed states can feel like a poesis. Sometimes haunting and sometimes other pieces, right? There's like some very real elements to it, but I'm also trying to make space for the poetics to emerge and be um, in a way that can occur anytime that I'm just being.
Yeah, no, thank you both. I mean, I think the only thing that I would add, and it's really just echoing of what you've both shared, is that I think for me, I've had to come to accept that um like so for me, I get stuck a lot as well. And so those times used to be really challenging for me mentally. Um, and I've actually allowed myself to work with that in ways in my writing that I find really, really helpful. And so instead of trying to overcome that stuckness, I work with it and I play with it, and that stuckness can actually become part of my kind of poetic writing. So, um, like the crossing out, for example, for folks who struggle with, and even that word struggle has connotations to it, but who experience perhaps perfectionism in many ways. And I know that was a huge thing for me, that feeling that nothing was ever good enough. I love the idea of that crossing because it's almost kind of like acknowledging that nothing's ever permanent on a page as well too, right? So we're always reworking things. So I think that's what I would add to that. I know Katie has their hand up, so maybe we'll go to Katie, and then I know Matthew also asked a question in the chat, so maybe we'll do Katie's question and then verbally speak to Matthew's question.
Thank you all so much for sharing so generously yourselves. It's a real honor. It kind of ties into some of the points you've made about self-editing and feeling like bits of you are being chipped away. How do you keep going in a world that says you should only do things that you're good at or that deserve publication? How do you preserve a safe space for experimentation and for things that are just for you? How do you make that space work? It comes from a vaguely personal perspective where did a lot of poetry as a kid but didn't grow up to be a poet and therefore self-edit and self-select and don't engage in things that I'm not good at, but that bring me a lot of joy.
Well, the way I think of this is like I self-define as a poet, and I think it's this, sort of like the act defines the noun. This sort of like, if you write poetry, you are a poet. There's no hierarchy of what poetry is or should be. Because if you're writing poetry, it is poetry. And part of the way I freed myself from those expectations and definitions of like what makes good poetry and who defines it is if it was impactful for me and I'm getting something out of it, then that's important. And also because the kind of poetry I wanted to write was freeform poetry that didn't necessarily have a structure. I've written structured poetry before, and I have enjoyed that too, but I wasn't always necessarily drawn to a structured form of poetry with a very defined rules and definition. So then I was like, if this is the kind of poetry I want to write, it may not, some people might read that and be like, what is this? This isn't poetry as they understand it. But my understanding of that is that's what I wanted to write. And there's still a musicality in it, and there's still a creativity in it. So that, and there are many things in the world that people describe as poetry. Something that moves them, something that's beautiful. And you can apply that same, I think, thinking to the writing and creative process of that we can self-define this as being poetry. And I think that's a way to step out of those boxes that are kind of put, or the gatekeeping that might be put over a creative process, particularly when we're young and we're kind of socialized about this is good art or that's not art, or who can create art and who can't. Because it's very difficult to initially step out of that. So that's kind of some of the ways that I started to challenge that a little bit.
That's really gorgeous. Thank you. Tracy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Rosiel, what you just shared was so stunning. Yeah, I think I'll just add, just I think briefly, just a lot of resonance around what you said, Katie. Like, just I think it's so real. I resonate so much with that. And also there are times when like I'll ebb and flow around it, where like, I'll be kind of um, really self-critical about all of these pieces. And I think something I really want to highlight is I just love the ways that you mentioned experimentation, and then also like to me like a notion of play, um, and also which body minds have access to play, and what are the institutional structures, oppressions, and injustices that deny various forms of play and experimentation, and what does it mean to navigate that. Um, and I think I come back a lot to Petra Kuppers's work, and also a lot of the free spaces that she offers online quite beautifully, then incorporate the somatics and literally these spaces to do that together and in community and really imagine disabled spaces. And I think that that's also something as well, as what does it mean to experiment if one desires with others in a space where you're really deeply held, because I think it can be so deeply vulnerable to experiment and swim through and past some of these edges. And what does it mean for folks to hold space for that, and just really, really affirm it? So I think that everyone deserves that for certain.
Yeah, I would just echo what folks have said here too. I think that, part of this idea of maddening as well in terms of disrupting and reimagining and dismantling these oppressive kind of boxes is also allowing space for us to do and be, and for it to always be good enough. So I hear and echo what you shared, Katie, in those struggles, and I appreciate your vulnerability in asking that question. So thank you. I think we will also just turn to Matthew. I know they had a question as well. I don't know if we want to verbally speak to it, just around inspiration within different states of experiencing madness and navigating that. I see Jersey, you commented already. I don't know if you want to verbally say anything in expansion.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate this comment, Matthew. Yeah, and I think I also just wanted to, I think, just really amplify and make space too, because, you know, to build off of what we were just talking about around like what are the spaces that can also really hold and nourish that, is to also, of course, we as a journal seek to be that space. It doesn't guarantee that we are. We're also a journal too that, particularly in terms of an editorial board, is predominantly white. So also we have to name, right, the ways in which uh, we ourselves are part of and connected to and complicit as well within larger systems of injustice. Um, so it doesn't exclude us from harm, and at the same time, I also want to invite, if pieces arise for you that you would like to share, and we can be a place to honor that and validate that. Yeah, we would love to be a part of it, and I think that also connects to um, another question in the chat that I love so much too. If someone doesn't understand it, it really is their loss, and it isn't our responsibility as poets to seek validation from others for our work. I love that so much, because as well, there's a ways that of questioning, that can be such a profound form of epistemic injustice and invalidation, that just is so real. You're exactly right. At least for me, sometimes I actually feel like the poetics um, demand spaces to not have to be validated. I'm still playing with that, but sometimes I feel that where it's like I've already kind of put something so muddy on there, and it's like, oh, like you didn't get it. Well, that's okay. Like it's intentionally muddied and messied, and that was the point. Like I invite your confusion because I'm confused too. So
I love that so much. Like I resonate with it because I know I've been thinking lately about spaces that I enter and how I enter and if I enter and like my work and stuff too. And I love this notion of kind of refusal as well as saying, well, you don't get it, so oh well, and I think that's gorgeous because it's not asking validation from systems and ways of being and thinking that have been harmful to us and Mad folks. So, Rosiel, I don't know if you have anything else to share
Yeah,
or
I think there's also reflecting on both of those comments, there's also a lot of importance to putting out there those less understood or invisibilized experiences that people don't get and won't get to begin with. And how powerful that is, particularly when people have that response of, I don't get this, and they may continue not to get that and to keep putting those experiences, responses out there, and that being part of change. And the streams of self, streams of dialogue, streams of consciousness, all of the different ways of experiencing and being and madness. And that being something that maybe people don't relate to or won't understand, but it being out there. And that's important and it can be groundbreaking in itself. And that kind of being a kind of validation in itself if people are saying they don't understand that, because that means that that hasn't been out there before or that person hasn't encountered that before, and maybe that will like plant a little seed or it will challenge them in some way, or that it needs to be out there and it needs to continue being out there. So that's its own form of valid.
I feel
Not
like
that validation is needed, but it's its own form of like showing that change is happening.
I feel like when you share, it's such a gift. I so appreciate your reflections, Rosiel. Thank you for that. And there's something so powerful in this idea of like continuing to put ourselves, our work, our experiences out there, knowing that they will be misunderstood, but then also not knowing how it will be picked up or where it will be picked up. And who that work will touch as well, right? And so despite the self-questioning that can come with, at least I can speak for myself, right? The self-questioning, but continuing to put yourself out there regardless as well. So yeah, so thank you both so much for your reflections on that. Kath, how are we doing with time right now? I know we're a little beyond the hour.
Yeah, we're just slightly over the hour. But we did, after listening to poetry around time, I guess what does that mean at this point?
I just wanted
But
to quickly acknowledge a comment by Katie in the chat about celebration of work.
yeah.
I think that's a beautiful takeaway as well and a beautiful reflection. That acknowledging to yourself and celebrating your work and taking the time with that can be really important and powerful. And I think that's something that I will think about more. But I really like that. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Thanks, Rosiel, for picking up on that and for everyone's sharing in the chat and verbally. And just on the subject of time, I am aware that for some people on this call, it's quite late. And so while we're we could probably go a little longer if people had some burning questions, but we probably should keep in mind that it's different time zones for all of us. And while I'm very comfortably at midday and all I need to deal with is a little bit of hunger, someone else might need sleep where they are. Yeah, so I leave that to the three of you, Adam, Jersey, and Rosiel, to kind of decide.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I can probably hang for a few more minutes, but I will, on my Eastern time zone, have to go to bed at some time soon. I'm a early to sleep human, but I think we can, yeah, we can stay for a few minutes. At least I can. I don't want to speak for Rosiel and Jersey, so. Yeah, does anyone have I see a hand up. Yes, by Paula.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing, all of you. Um, I just see in the chat about the validation thing. I just read it and I'm like, isn't it? I know I'm here because I was looking for a validation for a part of myself that I don't really get validated anywhere else. And I think when I don't remember who shared it, but that to keep doing it, to keep putting it out there, I think that it's so important to have spaces like this, but also to have like work that doesn't conform to the norm everywhere so that those of us who need to see it, need to hear it, need to read it, need to feel it, that's the validation will come, you know? And even if, you know, we never get the chance to tell Jersey, oh my goodness, your work spoke to me in a way that I could not have imagined would happen. It just married my academic mind with my creative mind and made it okay for me to not be bound by the lines. And that it's not even sometimes, I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly, but it's not about, sometimes it's not the validation that I get from producing my own work. It's the validation I get from seeing somebody else's work, being able to express exactly what I'm feeling, thinking, experiencing, and that we might never have met. And I read your work and was like, this is the best thing I've ever read in my life because I'm reading my story written by somebody I've never met. So I think validation is important, I think is the point that I was trying to make. Sorry.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you. And I love the idea of validation and community and relation and the kind of, you know, kinship and friendship and just support that we can establish as mad people doing this work. So that's really important. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Wow, thank you so much for what you shared. Uh, oh, yeah, I just feel like I'll have to sit with that because it was just so, oh, so stunning. It means so much to me. Like it literally means so much to me. And yeah, I think everything that you shared is just so beautiful. And I love that notion of, yeah, the work that doesn't conform to the norm and having that everywhere. Oh, I just so agree with you. Because it really creates these pathways, these portals for more and more folks to explore these ways of creating and sharing and storying and unstorying. And yeah, I just I often think about, IMSJ, this journal, as a possible space for folks who may have sought to share the work, and particularly because I know that you also mentioned academia, who may have sought to share their work in particular spaces, perhaps a scholarly journal, and then received possibly have received feedback that really was deeply invalidating or really an act of epistemic injustice. And I know that that's by no means true for all spaces, not at all. There are absolutely remarkable spaces all over. And also, I do long for I do long for a time when folks can share their work in ways that are radically shattering norms, particularly also within these spaces that are can be quite deeply bound by it, um, and then harm does not occur. And I do wonder what that could look like and what that can feel like. It's definitely something we seek to co-create here. Yeah, thank you for what you shared.
I don't know, does anyone else have any other comments? Or Rosiel, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that was beautifully said. And resonates a lot so much with needing community validation, and that visibility as well is seeing your own stories reflected or just finding that solidarity in spaces and work is a really important part of being able to share and begin doing this kind of work. I mean, that was a huge part of how I started doing this kind of, or started stepping in, because I still feel so green and new on this space, is leaning into and looking into the wisdom of other people. I mean, I started reading memoirs, particularly as a child in the mental health system and adolescent in the mental health system. I was, you know, holding tight to memoirs and reading other people's stories and hope and leaning into that, and certainly leaning into a lot of visibility and needing to see that in other places, so that it definitely is part of hearing other voices and then finding a way to be another voice out there. I think is a huge part of that.
Yes, I think there's something about this idea of using writing as a way of kind of creating ourselves in, you know, environments, in particular academias like this, where our existence is denied, right? And so we're using poesis as like a way forward and a way of yeah, creating subjectivity when our subjectivity has essentially been erased. I think, does anyone else have any further questions? I don't know if you want to check the chat as well, Kath, or Jersey and Rosiel, just make sure we don't miss anyone.
Yeah, no, I think that's everyone, Adam. And we've had a few people say their goodbyes, or you know, because they've had to head off. So it's been lovely to see those comments, but it probably is time.
Sounds good. Yeah, so thank you all so much for coming tonight and for listening to everyone's you know, questions and performances. And in particular, I really appreciate Jersey and Rosiel for sharing your work and your thoughts. I'm gonna have so much gratitude and so much to think with, and I'm just, yeah, very grateful to be in this space. So thank you all, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, and thank you to you, Adam and Kath.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And
Adam.
if anyone needs anything or would like to reach out to the journal, please do. I know the email's been put in the chat, but we would love to hear from folks as well if anyone would like to talk about sharing their work or experiences. So, and I guess with that, we will say good night and good morning, depending on where you are. And thank you all. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you
See
so
you,
much, Kat.
Jersey. Yeah, that
Thank
was
you,
great.
Sonia.
Oh, I'm just going to turn the recording off. Recording.